The wedding America saw wasn't the whole story. The wedding looked like a fairy tale. But the real shock was hiding behind the lights. When Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce stepped into Madison Square Garden, the world thought it was watching the biggest celebrity NFL wedding of the decade. Cameras were waiting, fans were screaming outside barricades. Black SUVs rolled through Manhattan like a presidential convoy. And above the arena, the message everyone wanted finally flashed in glowing pink. Taylor and Travis were married, but almost immediately after the ceremony, another story started moving through the media, one that changed everything. Reports claimed the couple may have already tied the knot days earlier. Far away from the roaring crowds, far away from the Jumbotron, and far away from the cameras that had been chasing them for months. Suddenly, Madison Square Garden didn't look like the actual wedding anymore. It looked like the public reveal, and that one detail raised the question nobody could ignore. Why would Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce stage a massive second ceremony if the real legal moment had already happened? The setup alone was unlike anything New York had seen. Streets around Madison Square Garden were blocked off for days. Permits reportedly covered the area from July 2 through midday on July 4. Trucks had been arriving since late June, unloading covered structures, carpets, flowers, food, and private event materials. By the time the weekend arrived, several midtown blocks were locked down to protect the guests. Still, fans came anyway. Swifties lined West 31st Street in the heat, waiting for even one glimpse of a window, a dress, a familiar face, anything. Every time a tinted SUV approached, the crowd exploded. Nobody knew what was inside. Nobody knew who was arriving. But everyone could feel that something massive was happening. Then the rain started, and just as the storm rolled over Manhattan, the official confirmation landed. The city went quiet for a second, almost like the timing had been planned. Inside, a 2-day private celebration was already underway. Outside, the world believed it had just witnessed the beginning of Taylor and Travis's married life. But what if that beginning had already happened somewhere else? Before we go deeper, comment where you're watching from right now. If you believe Madison Square Garden was the real wedding, comment 1. If you think the real ceremony happened before New York, comment 2. And subscribe, because this story only gets stranger from here. Madison Square Garden became a locked box. To understand why people started questioning the Madison Square Garden wedding, you have to look at how carefully everything was controlled. This wasn't just a venue rental. This was a full-scale operation. For days, the arena was treated like a sealed fortress. Security expanded around the perimeter. Pedestrian access was limited. Vehicles were redirected. Workers moved in and out under tight restrictions. And anyone hoping to capture a private moment had almost no chance. That may be exactly why MSG was chosen. For most couples, a venue that can hold nearly 20,000 people would seem like the opposite of private. But for Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, privacy works differently. A small outdoor estate can be watched from helicopters. A hotel can leak. A church can be surrounded. But Madison Square Garden is different. Once people are inside, the building becomes a box. No overhead shots. No surprise paparazzi angles. No random guest wandering in with a phone held high. And that phone part mattered. According to the original reports circulating around the event, everyone inside had to follow one major rule. No phones, not guests, not vendors, not security. Nobody was supposed to record, post, or leak the moment before Taylor and Travis were ready. For a relationship that had been watched like a national sport, that rule was more than a request. It was the backbone of the entire night. Guests didn't just walk into a wedding. They reportedly entered a memory tunnel, surrounded by photos from Taylor and Travis's lives, childhood, career moments, family memories, and snapshots from the relationship that had pulled pop culture and the NFL into the same storm. Then came what some described as a secret garden built inside the arena, a softer world hidden inside one of the loudest buildings in America. That contrast was powerful. Outside, thousands of people were yelling and guessing. Inside, the couple was building a private version of their story, one image at a time. It wasn't only about luxury, it was about control, emotional control, media control, narrative control. And that's what makes the rumor of a private earlier ceremony so believable. Madison Square Garden was not built to keep the marriage secret, it was built to reveal it on their terms. The ceremony that made the crowd believe. By the time the ceremony began, the atmosphere inside Madison Square Garden reportedly felt less like a celebrity spectacle and more like a carefully written final scene. The official version was emotional, polished, and almost impossible not to believe. Taylor Swift wore a custom Christian Dior haute couture wedding dress. Travis Kelce stood in front of family, friends, athletes, entertainers, and power players from across the NFL and Hollywood. Their brothers held the most important roles beside them, Austin Swift as Taylor's man of honor, Jason Kelce as Travis's best man. That detail mattered because it made the ceremony feel grounded. There were no giant bridal parties designed for attention. No unnecessary distractions, just families standing close, while two of the most famous people in America turned their relationship into something permanent in front of the world. And then came the vows. Guests said Taylor and Travis wrote their own. For Travis, that reportedly meant a moment that felt sincere and surprisingly vulnerable, the kind of emotional turn that reminded people he wasn't just a Super Bowl champion or a podcast personality, he was a man standing in front of the biggest decision of his life. For Taylor, the moment carried a different kind of weight. Reports claimed part of her vows even included singing. Not a concert, not a performance for the crowd, something smaller, more personal, and more dangerous emotionally because everyone in that room knew what her voice means. Taylor Swift singing during her own vows wasn't just romantic, it was symbolic. It turned the ceremony into a memory nobody inside would forget. That's why the Madison Square Garden wedding worked so well. It felt real because it was real emotionally, even if the legal paperwork may have already been handled somewhere else. The tears were real. The families were real. The vows were real. The celebration was real, but the public misunderstood what kind of real it was. This wasn't necessarily the first moment they became husband and wife. It may have been the first moment they allowed the world to witness the meaning of it. And that difference changes the whole story. Because while fans outside were waiting for confirmation, the people inside may have been watching something more complicated. Not the start of the marriage, but the celebration of a decision already made in private. The guest list sent a message. The guest list at Madison Square Garden was not random. It was a statement. When the arrival started, the event became a collision between music, sports, television, film, and NFL power. Names connected to Hollywood walked in beside names connected to football. Entertainers, athletes, broadcasters, executives, close friends, and family all appeared under one roof. It felt less like a wedding and more like a cultural summit built around two people who had somehow become bigger together than they already were apart. That is the Taylor and Travis effect. Taylor brings the music industry, global fandom, and pop culture gravity. Travis brings NFL history, locker room loyalty, Kansas City pride, and the kind of sports credibility that America understands instantly. Put them together, and suddenly a wedding becomes front-page news across entertainment sites, sports networks, gossip columns, and morning shows all at once. But the most interesting part wasn't only who arrived. It was who people expected to see, who they were shocked to see, and who did not appear at all. Some arrivals created instant speculation because they seemed to close old chapters. When people believed certain friendships had cooled or disappeared, one invitation could send the internet into full detective mode. A single guest walking through the door became a headline because fans were not just watching a wedding. They were watching years of rumors get answered without a single statement. Then came the absences. In a celebrity wedding this public, missing names can be just as loud as visible ones. When someone does not show up, people start asking if there is distance, drama, scheduling conflict, or something deeper. That is the danger of building a life under public attention. Even silence becomes evidence. Even absence becomes content. For Taylor and Travis, this meant every seat in the room carried meaning. Every hug could become a clue. Every no-show could become a theory. And yet, through all of it, the couple appeared to keep the focus exactly where they wanted it. On family, loyalty, and the future they were choosing. The guest list did not just celebrate the marriage, it protected the story. The people allowed inside were not only witnesses, they were part of a carefully built wall between the private truth and the public version. And behind that wall, the biggest question still remained unanswered. Had the real wedding already happened before any of them reached New York? The details were too personal to be just a show. What made the Madison Square Garden celebration so convincing was not only the scale, it was the detail. A fake-looking spectacle would have been easy to dismiss. A celebrity couple could fill a room with flowers, designer clothes, famous faces, and expensive food, and people would still say it was all for attention. But this event reportedly went deeper than that. It was built around memory, inside jokes, family, favorite places, and the emotional language of two people who knew exactly what story they wanted the night to tell. Guests reportedly moved through spaces filled with images from different stages of Taylor and Travis's lives. That kind of design does more than decorate a room. It tells people, this did not start when the cameras found us. It reminds everyone that before the stadium suites, before the podcasts, before the headlines, there were two separate lives that had to arrive at the same point. Even the food reportedly carried personal meaning. Instead of a generic luxury menu, the couple was said to have chosen dishes tied to favorite New York restaurants. That detail matters because it made the night feel lived in, not manufactured. It was not just about impressing celebrities. It was about placing small pieces of their real world inside a massive arena. There were games, too, a strange but revealing choice. Games at a wedding this famous might sound unexpected, but for Travis Kelce, it fits. He is an athlete, a competitor, someone whose life has been shaped by playbooks, pressure, and locker room energy. For Taylor, games also fit in a different way. Clues, puzzles, symbols, and Easter eggs have always been part of how fans experience her universe. Together, those elements created a wedding that felt like both of them. That is why the secret ceremony rumor did not weaken the MSG event. In some ways, it made it more interesting. Because if they were already legally married, then every detail in New York was not about paperwork, it was about storytelling. And Taylor Swift understands storytelling better than almost anyone alive. Travis Kelce understands big moments too. He knows what it means to perform under pressure, to step into a stadium when millions are watching, and still make the moment feel personal. Madison Square Garden became their shared stage not to deceive the public, but to turn a private commitment into a public memory. The Tennessee twist changed everything. The moment Tennessee entered the story, the entire timeline shifted. Reports began claiming Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce had held a smaller private ceremony before the Madison Square Garden celebration. Not in Manhattan, not under the giant lights, not surrounded by thousands of fans outside barricades. The rumored location was Tennessee, a place tied deeply to Taylor's life, her career, and the earliest version of the dream that eventually made her one of the biggest artists in the world. That detail is why the rumor caught fire. Tennessee is not just another location for Taylor. It is part of her origin story. It is where she moved as a teenager chasing music. It is where ambition became identity. It is where the public version of Taylor Swift began taking shape long before stadium tours, global records, and billion-dollar headlines. So if she and Travis wanted a private legal ceremony, Tennessee made sense. It would be meaningful without being obvious, personal without being performative, close enough to family history to feel sacred, but quiet enough to avoid the full force of New York media. And for a couple followed by fans, reporters, flight trackers, and social media accounts, quiet is almost impossible to buy. It has to be designed. That is where the flight timeline became part of the mystery. According to the original story, online tracking suggested Taylor's plane made several stops before the New York wedding weekend, including cities connected to family. To some people, that looked ordinary. To others, it looked like logistics. Family moving quietly, private schedules lining up. A major public event being prepared after a more intimate one had already happened. Nothing was confirmed directly by Taylor or Travis. And that matters. This story lives in the space between public fact, reported detail, and fan interpretation. But the pattern felt familiar. Their relationship had always balanced visibility and secrecy. They could be seen in the stadium suite, then disappear for weeks. They could create headlines without explaining anything. They could let the world talk while they moved at their own speed. That is exactly what the Tennessee twist suggested. By the time New York was locked down, the most important legal step may have already been complete. Madison Square Garden was not the secret. Tennessee was. And if that is true, then the real genius of the wedding was that everyone was looking in the loudest place while the quietest place held the answer. The prenup became its own drama. Once people began believing the real marriage may have happened before Madison Square Garden, the conversation quickly turned from romance to money. And with Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, that conversation was never going to be small. Taylor's fortune is enormous, built across music, touring, publishing, film, merchandise, and one of the most loyal fan bases in entertainment. Travis has also built a powerful brand of his own through the NFL, championships, endorsements, business moves, and media attention. But financially, the gap between them is still massive. That kind of difference creates a simple reality. If marriage is about love, the legal structure around marriage is about protection. That is where the prenup rumors became unavoidable. Reports suggested both sides had strong legal guidance before the public wedding weekend. Some speculation even claimed Taylor's father, Scott Swift, played a major role in making sure the agreement was handled carefully. That would not be surprising. For someone at Taylor's level, marriage is not only personal. It touches companies, copyrights, future earnings, real estate, family planning, brand value, and creative control. In normal celebrity gossip, a prenup can sound cold. In this case, it sounded strategic. The purpose would not be to predict failure, it would be to protect clarity. Separate assets stay separate. Wealth created before the marriage remains clean. Future earnings are defined. Business interests do not become emotional weapons. And most importantly for Taylor, the right to write, create, and own her artistic output remains protected. That last point is huge. Taylor Swift's life has often become music, but her music is also business. If her marriage becomes part of future songs, albums, or creative projects, then legal language around what belongs to whom matters more than fans might realize. Travis is not just marrying a woman, he is marrying someone whose personal experiences can become cultural events. That does not make the relationship less real. It makes the relationship more serious. Because when two people with this much to lose still move forward, it suggests they are not pretending the pressure does not exist. They are facing it before it can become a problem. The prenup drama may sound like gossip, but underneath it is a deeper truth. Taylor and Travis were not just planning a wedding. They were building a system strong enough to survive fame. The bad boy clause rumor lit the internet on fire. The most explosive part of the prenup conversation was the rumored bad boy clause. The phrase alone was enough to send fans, sports commentators, and entertainment media into overdrive. Reports claimed the agreement could include language connected to infidelity, with a potential financial penalty if one side broke the trust of the marriage. Neither Taylor nor Travis publicly confirmed that detail, and it should be treated as a report, not a proven fact. But once the phrase entered the conversation, it became impossible to ignore. Why? Because it blended two worlds perfectly: celebrity drama and NFL masculinity. Travis Kelce has spent his life inside a competitive football culture where confidence, attention, and public image all matter. Taylor Swift has spent her career turning heartbreak, loyalty, betrayal, and personal growth into songs that millions of people treat like emotional evidence. Put those two stories together, and a rumored loyalty clause becomes more than legal language. It becomes a symbol. For some fans, it sounded smart. A way to protect Taylor from humiliation. A way to make expectations clear before marriage began. A way to prevent the kind of public scandal that could damage not only a relationship, but two major brands. For others, it sounded unnecessary or even too dramatic. They argue that trust should not need a financial penalty attached to it. But that view ignores the scale of this relationship. Taylor and Travis are not a private couple living outside public pressure. If something goes wrong, it does not stay between two people. It becomes headlines, videos, commentary, memes, brand questions, and fan wars. In that world, clarity can be protection. The bad boy clause rumor also changed the way people looked back at the two-ceremony timeline. If the legal agreement was finalized before the private ceremony, then the Madison Square Garden event happened after the serious business had already been handled. The public saw flowers, vows, famous guests, and glowing signs. Behind that, there may have been attorneys, negotiations, asset protection, and carefully defined boundaries. That contrast is what made the story so addictive. On the surface, it was a fairy tale. Underneath, it was a high-stakes merger between music royalty and NFL royalty. And if the rumor is even close to true, Taylor and Travis did not walk into marriage blindly. They walked in with love, strategy, and consequences. The real power move was controlling the narrative. The most impressive part of the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce wedding story is not the venue, the guest list, the dress, or even the rumor of a secret ceremony. It is control. For months, the public believed it was watching every major piece of this relationship unfold in real time. Fans tracked appearances. Reporters analyzed travel. NFL broadcasts turned stadium suites into weekly storyline. Every smile, every handhold, every family interaction became evidence in a giant national guessing game. But the wedding proved something different. Taylor and Travis were never simply being watched. They were choosing what the world was allowed to see. Madison Square Garden was perfect because it looked impossible to hide. A massive building in the middle of Manhattan. Streets blocked. Fans outside. Celebrities arriving. News crews waiting. It was loud, visible, and impossible to ignore. That made everyone assume the truth had to be there. But if the private Tennessee ceremony happened first, then New York was not where the secret lived. New York was the distraction from the secret. That is the power. The couple gave the world a spectacle so big that people stopped asking whether something smaller had already happened. They let fans gather outside the arena. They let the city buzz. They let the pink lights flash. They let the headlines write themselves. And all the while, the most important part may have already been finished in a quieter room, with fewer people, fewer cameras, and far less noise. This does not mean Madison Square Garden was fake. That would be too simple. The public wedding was real in the emotional sense. It gave family and friends a moment to witness. It gave fans a symbol. It gave the media a story. It turned private love into public history, but the actual marriage may have belonged to them first. That is the part people cannot stop thinking about. In an age where everyone believes famous people owe the public every detail, Taylor and Travis may have pulled off the rarest thing possible. They shared the celebration without surrendering the core memory. And now the next questions begin. Where do they go after this? What happens to Travis's NFL future under even brighter attention? Does Taylor turn this chapter into music? Do they settle into married life quietly? Or does the spotlight grow even hotter? For now, one thing is clear. Everyone watched Madison Square Garden. But the real story may have started before the world ever knew where to look. What Taylor and Travis really proved. The biggest lesson from the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce wedding story is not about fame. It is about boundaries. In a world where every celebrity relationship gets pulled apart by strangers online, Taylor and Travis found a way to give the public a moment without giving away everything. They understood something most famous couples learn too late. When millions of people feel invested in your love story, privacy does not happen by accident. It has to be protected. That is why the two-ceremony theory matters so much. If the private ceremony happened first, then Taylor and Travis made a strategic decision. They separated the sacred part from the spectacle, the legal commitment, the family intimacy, the quiet promise that may have belonged to them alone. Madison Square Garden, meanwhile, became the grand celebration, the cultural event, the public memory fans could hold on to. And honestly, that may be the smartest move they could have made. For Travis, this marriage brings a new kind of pressure. He is no longer only an NFL star, a champion, or one of the most recognizable tight ends in football. He is now connected to one of the most powerful women in entertainment history. Every game, every interview, every public appearance will be watched through a different lens. The challenge for him will be staying grounded, staying focused, and proving that love does not distract from legacy when handled with maturity. For Taylor, this chapter is just as important. After years of having her relationships turned into headlines, theories, jokes, and songs, she appears to have chosen a path built on control and peace. Not silence, but control. Not hiding, but choosing. There is a difference. That is the real strategy here. They did not fight the spotlight. They redirected it. They let the public celebrate what was safe to share, while protecting what was too personal to become content. That is a lesson far beyond celebrity. Whether you are famous or not, love needs boundaries. Family needs protection. A relationship cannot survive if every private moment becomes public property. And maybe that is the most human part of this story. Behind the stadium lights, the designer dress, the NFL cameras, the pop star mythology, and the billion-dollar headlines, this is still about two people trying to build something real while the world watches. That requires patience. It requires trust. It requires peace. And it requires understanding that love is not proven by how loudly it is displayed, but by how carefully it is protected. So now the question is not whether Madison Square Garden was the real wedding or the public celebration. The question is whether Taylor and Travis can keep choosing each other when the noise gets even louder, because marriage is not the final scene. It is the beginning of the hardest chapter. If you believe Taylor and Travis made the right move by keeping part of their love story private, comment 1. If you think the public still deserves more answers, comment 2. And if you want more NFL celebrity drama, relationship updates, and behind-the-scenes stories, make sure you subscribe, hit like, and share this video with someone who has been following this story from the beginning.